I had a friend a few years ago who had a very light heart attack. He didn't need surgery and he didn't even stay overnight in the hospital, but for his wife and him it was very terrifying. Once the fear was behind him and he knew he wasn't going to die and he was able to calm down a little bit, he got a major lecture from his doctor. I had this neighbor who was a woodworking genius. He's been retired for 10 or 15 years. I think when he had his job, it was some kind of a white-collar job. I think maybe he was an accountant or something like that. The other day I was outside and I saw him, or I heard him in his garage. So I went over to say hey, and we ended up talking for a couple of hours. We talked about random stuff. I don't even remember what we talked about. But while we were just chit-chatting, he built from scratch an absolutely perfect birdhouse. But the weird part was he didn't measure anything. He just kind of eyeballed everything and it came out perfectly. When I was in junior high school, I took a year of wood shop. The first half we did these tiny little projects. Each one took about a week. And each one was kind of cool, but they didn't seem to be for any purpose. They didn't seem to have any kind of connection to one another. I saw an interesting lecture from an anthropologist a few years ago. He was talking mostly about self-awareness and consciousness, which is kind of strange since you would expect a lecture about self-awareness and consciousness to be given by a psychologist or maybe a neurologist, not an anthropologist. But he was talking about self-awareness as a human instinct, or from a human instinct standpoint. He said most of our human instincts, our uniquely human instincts, are kind of like meta instincts. For example, a lot of animals will have a certain type of curiosity, but this curiosity instinct only really shows up when they're looking for certain types of food in certain types of environments. But humans have a very general curiosity about stuff in general, a kind of meta curiosity to lower animals, specific curiosity about specific things in specific situations. He said self-awareness is kind of like a meta instinct that popped up when our brains started to get really big. Right around that time when our brains started to get really big, we started to wander around the world. And we started to live in different situations. We started to live in different environments. And so we had to learn how to survive in those different environments. Other animals, for example, are born with a set of pre-programmed instincts that only work in certain environments. Outside of those environments, those instincts won't help at all, and those animals will die. But humans can learn how to live everywhere, anywhere. He said the best description of our self-awareness is as a new instinct generator. To be aware of what we need to learn and then learn that thing until it's down to the level of unconscious competence. Once we learn something to the level of unconscious competence, it's essentially a new instinct. According to this guy, that is our purpose from an anthropological, biological point of view. To continue to learn more skills so that we can continue to get more stuff. Today we've kind of short-circuited that process. We still have the desire to continue to get more stuff, but we've been so successful, we can get more stuff without needing to learn new things. And that's why when we get more stuff without going through the process first of learning new things, that new stuff that we get is not nearly as satisfying. This is why we have become such hopeless consumers in modern times. The second half of the class, we built this wall unit. It combined all of the stuff that we learned in the first half. It had pretty much everything you would find in a house. It wasn't hooked up, but it had a full set of wiring. It had a full set of plumbing. It had a window. It had the insulation and the drywall and the studs. It even had a little bit of a roof. I asked the guy how he managed to build a perfect birdhouse without ever measuring anything, and he laughed and told me that I had only seen the final step. He said the first step was to imagine something in mind and then continue to imagine that in mind for a couple of weeks. And during those couple of weeks, he would imagine building it in mind. And each time he would imagine building it in mind, he would imagine it with a little bit more specificity and detail. So after a couple of weeks, he would have practiced building that birdhouse in his mind several dozen times. Each subsequent time was a little bit more detailed and a little bit more specific than the last. And then when you've got all the bugs worked out in your mind, you just build it in real life. And since you've practiced it so much in your mind, building it in real life is easy and familiar, even if it's the first time. He sat him down, looked at him, and said, most people make the mistake of living life on autopilot. You go to work, you come home, you eat whatever you're hungry for. If you don't have any food and you're hungry, you go to the supermarket, you buy whatever looks good and you eat that. If you do that, if you live without thinking, you'll die a lot sooner than you need to. But if you think of your body as a sophisticated piece of equipment and you take care of it like a sophisticated piece of equipment, it will last a lot longer. You'll get much more use out of it. One way to think of your sophisticated piece of equipment is a temporary housing that holds your consciousness and self-awareness. The better shape you keep yourself in, the more you'll be able to enjoy your self-awareness and your consciousness. If you take yourself for granted, live life on autopilot, and don't take good care of yourself, your self-awareness and consciousness will have a much shorter lifespan.